And we are live.
Okay. You getting your-
Everybody's on screen.
Tyler, do you have any of your books in print?
Not with me, I don't.
I mean, but you do have print books though? Okay, because if you bring some next year, I'll make sure and buy, you know, buy a book.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Okay, so we are live. Welcome. This is the post-debate, post-conference debrief. You're here with Mark Lambert, Clinton Wilcox, Joel Forchos, Tyler Villa, and myself, John Dunbar.
JD Salinger. Oh, sorry.
Yes.
Super cool MC guy.
JD. Not to be confused with Kevin Costner with Dances with Wolves, Dumb Bear, Stands with Fists.
It's not all about you, Joe.
And make sure not to confuse me with Brad Pitt.
Yeah, that would be a challenge.
Right.
I was wondering how we got Brad Pitt on the panel.
Yeah, it's funny. Okay, so we are live. Again, thank you all for who came out and who watched our stuff online. We greatly appreciate it. Again, if you have any follow-up questions, feel free to leave them in the comment section, and we will probably get that answered at some point in time in the future. So first off, guys, thumbs up, thumbs down on the conference.
Oh,
I had
I'm
fun.
getting our live on our page. Thumbs up?
Thumbs up?
yeah, I'm okay with it, yeah.
All right, so let's just start with Mark. What was one of the highlights of the conference that you would like to highlight? Give me a highlight you want to highlight.
A highlight that I want to highlight. I really enjoyed the Friday night discussion panel.
Yeah.
I love that. Of course, I do that sort of thing regularly at my church, and so that's a lot more fun of interaction with the
Like mine.
audience and other people. So it's a more interaction.
Tyler, your highlightable highlight?
Highlightable highlight. I think I really enjoyed the audience questions during the debate portion of it. I always enjoy debating. It's always a fun time, but I think the audience had some particularly good questions for it was balanced. It was both sides. They were interesting. I think the question section was really good.
Great. Clinton?
Yeah, I mean, this was my first Mentionables conference attending, and so I really, really liked all of it. The panel last night was great. I think probably I would probably pick the debate as my highlight. I'm not able to get out to a lot of debates in person. Occasionally they'll have one, because I'm from California, they'll occasionally have one down at Biola University. But there aren't a whole lot of debates or apologetics conferences or anything of that nature going on in my state. So the opportunity to attend a debate live is always, kind of fun for me. So I think I'd probably pinpoint that as my highlight of the whole conference.
Cool. All right. Joel?
Yeah, well, I gotta say that was a really enjoyable debate. Just off the top of my head, in terms of pure conference, I was really eager to do my presentation, and I enjoyed giving it. Hopefully somebody watched it, but it was an enjoyable experience, a culmination of a lot of work.
Great. I think for me, I like the Friday night panel. This is my first time emceeing an event, so I thought I did fairly well.
Yes, you did. Excellent job all weekend.
Of course, it was me. I'm the humblest one of the group, I think.
Obviously.
Obviously.
Humble and proud of it.
Most humble.
Yes, I'm the humblest, least humblest. But anyway, I would say I like the panel discussion. I think we had good interaction. We had the one young man asking good questions. So I would say, honestly, audience participation. I think we had more audience participation this year than we did last year.
Yeah.
So I think that's going to be my highlight. Is just we had audience participation.
And the
So-
audience participation was largely in the dissent, which is fine.
Yeah,
the discussion was good.
Yes. Yeah, so for those of you who not aware, last year we held it in North Carolina, and a significant amount of the questions went to the atheist Ben Watkins, if you're watching, hey Ben. And Tyler just kind of sat there twiddling his thumbs.
I chimed in every now and then.
Yeah, he's like, yes. But this year, the tables were kind of turned in a sense. jaw, sat there during the Q&A session for the most part, and was like, yeah,
We had a large skeptic turnout.
yes.
That it,
Yeah.
it was, a lot of the folks that were there for the debate came to see Aaron, and so they were targeting Tyler with their questions.
I was telling when they were walking up, they were looking at me the entire time. I was like, okay.
Right, and I think everything was handled really well. Everyone was polite, nice. There
Yeah.
were no
Riots?
riots. I mean, yeah, they,
No hecklers.
yeah, I was pleasantly
I was
surprised.
tempted.
Yeah.
Thank you for controlling yourself.
and we went out to eat afterwards, and it was a fun time had out.
Yep.
If you're in Waco, Texas, this is a plug. They didn't non-paid spokesperson. Check out Griff's. They're pretty good.
That's GRIFF''S.
You're gonna see a gas station, but it's the right place.
Yes,
Right.
yes. So that's okay. So new highlight for John, Griff's. That's the highlight of the conference was
The
Griff's.
food.
Yeah.
The
The
food.
food was the
Are you gaslighting JD?
No.
No, never mind. It was a joke. That's fine.
Anyway.
Yeah, the gas station.
Griff's.
Yeah.
Gotta go to the gas station.
Right.
All right.
Gotta go to Griff's. I think you've just created a motto for him.
Hey, I created a breakfast burrito for them. It's
That's
called
true.
the Out of Towner.
That's
So if you
true.
go to Griff's, just ask for the Out of Towner. They'll give you a country fried steak with egg and cheese and bacon with white gravy. So
Wrapped in a tortilla.
wrapped in a tortilla.
And I created an omelet for them. If you go to Griff's, don't ask for my creation.
All right. So yeah, what were some of your questions, Joel?
All right, so I'm gonna do a couple of questions that came up from the talks that were given, which I felt were best discussed by the group and not just thrown out to the stage for reasons. And then I'd like to present you guys with a couple of the questions from the children's project that we did, and by we I mean myself and Caleb, that no one else participated in, to see what your take was on them. These were questions that we actually got from actual children that were, challenging their own way, because children ask challenging theological questions. So let's start with the conference questions. This one is directly for you, although we can all discuss it.
Oh, for me?
When I say you, I mean Clint.
Okay. Yeah, 'cause there's two of us here. I just want to make sure.
Right.
Okay.
What would be the bioethical position on capital punishment?
You got that question from a child?
Okay.
It surprised me as much as it did you.
Right. Capital punishment. I don't believe capital punishment is really a bioethical concern.
Okay.
But it's an ethical concern certainly.
Well, it
Um,
seems
so-
similar to the idea
Well,
of
yeah,
euthanasia.
Yeah. I mean,
Seems like it's in the same camp.
yeah. It's more along the lines though of like the ethics of punishment, which has some crossover
Yeah.
between the two.
So
So
is it justified to kill a person? How about that?
right. And so a lot of the the arguments I gave regarding bioethics can also be applied here.
Mhm.
And so regarding capital punishment, obviously, as I argued in my talk, human life begins at fertilization, and it doesn't end until the cells in the body ceases to be able to act as a unified whole. So basically, from fertilization to death, you're a living human organism, a living human person.
Mhm.
And so I would say that abortion and euthanasia are both wrong because you're killing an innocent human being. That being said, capital punishment is not really along the same lines, because now we're not talking about killing an innocent human person.
Mhm.
We're talking about killing a convicted murderer after a fair trial by his peers.
Okay.
So even if you oppose capital punishment, the two situations or the three situations of abortion, euthanasia, capital punishment are not equivalent, because now we're dealing with pro-life people are generally split on this question.
Mhm.
A lot of them are pro-capital punishment, a lot of them oppose capital punishment. I am pro-capital punishment with some caveats, because it's not always wrong to kill a human being.
Okay.
It's always wrong to intentionally kill an innocent human being, but it's not always wrong to kill a human being. And self-defense is usually an uncontroversial situation in which you can kill a person or kill a human being. And so it's not always wrong to kill a human being. And so I would say that opposing capital punishment because you're killing a human being is not very reasonable, as it's not always wrong to kill a human being.
Mhm.
So you need more than that to go on. But I would say that because every individual has a right to life. You have a right to life by virtue of being a human being and being an individual substance of a rational nature.
Mhm.
All human beings have that rational nature. So you have the right to life because you're a human being. But rights carry with them duties. If I expect people to respect my right to life, then I have an obligation to respect the right to life of others. If I don't, then I have no right to expect others to respect that.
Mhm.
And so I don't believe in vigilante justice. If someone, kills my brother and then I go out and kill that person, that would be wrong for me. That would still be an act of murder because I'm taking vengeance. But the justice system has the right to enact justice. And so if someone forfeits their right to life by killing in cold blood, then they have no right to expect the courts to respect their right to life. So it's not immoral for the court to justly put a convicted murderer to death. Now, that being said, the caveat I would add is that I don't believe that the legal system is perfect because it's run by imperfect human beings.
Mhm.
So while I agree with the fundamental legal principle of guilty of innocent until proven guilty, and you're proven guilty when you can prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the person committed the crime. I think the evidence for guilt must be stronger than simple reasonable doubt if we're going to put them to death. So reasonable doubt to put them in jail, but if we have much stronger evidence which puts it which gives us a much greater confidence that the person is guilty, then I think we can kill them. But I think great pains need to be taken to make sure we don't put an innocent person to death.
Okay, anybody else want to jump in on that one?
Yeah, that's about the only thing where people are arguing against capital punishment, that it's like, okay, well, is the pursuit of that justice worth the risk of killing an innocent person?
Yeah.
Okay, well, how do we need to work around that? But I mean, I personally, go back to just Genesis 9:6 and, well, he commanded it. But one
Yeah,
thing-
yeah, because I mean, they had the same problem back then, like how do you determine, how do you make sure you don't put an innocent person to
Well,
death?
and one thing that I hear a lot of people, like whenever we'll talk about the Old Testament, oh, well, it said that you can, stone someone for adultery, or if your kid's disobedient, to kill him. No, it says it's a crime, and then you take the offender to a court. I mean, it's something it wasn't just like, my kid was disobedient, I'm gonna kill him, right? Like you were saying,
Right,
it's
yeah.
the justice system
Right.
of that.
Yeah.
And, I know that's not exactly
Well,
the
yeah,
topic.
well, no, and I agree, and I
So,
think, I think murder doesn't necessarily have to be the only capital crime. Like I think rape is a crime that would be reasonable to put the perpetrator to death. And treason has also traditionally been something else that is punishable by death. I don't know if I necessarily agree with treason, but I think it's at least reasonable that we could put rapists to death as a crime or as a punishment for their crime.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
All right. Yeah, we good? Okay.
By the way, the Magic Man 1986, Magic Man, I see me, Nagito. It's Caleb, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Such
So,
a
or I
millennial.
wonder, I wonder if it's a heart reference.
Could be. He said, by the way, there's still room for expanding the children's project.
Okay, cool. Yeah, there's actually a couple of questions that we never got around to because I can't draw that fast. But,
There you go, second edition.
Nice.
When children mention God, part two.
Do you wanna
The mention.
give a reformer perspective on capital punishment?
No? Okay. Hey, the government does not bear the sword for
That's
nothing.
right, it's not really Saturday in vain, yeah.
Okay, so, this one was, it was prompted by your talk, Tyler. The Bible commands you not to reap the corners of your field, correct? Okay. It also commands you not to cut the corners of your beard. Is that a coincidence or is there some relationship?
No, some of the laws about the distinctiveness of the Jews as a people to be standout were literally, I don't want to say arbitrary because there's a reason why they were decided, but the idea is that they had a visible representation that led them to show that they were distinct from the other people. The idea was that kind of every aspect of their life was to be dedicated to God, even your morning shave, you were supposed to do to the glory of God is kind of the idea. The not reaping the corner of the fields is literally you're to plant and to cultivate your entire field, but you leave those so that, you know, hopefully, if anyone's down in hard times or is poor, they have food. It's one way that the people were supposed to care for the needy.
So can I ask you a follow-up question on that? Because obviously the whole, socialism versus capitalism thing has been really big, and a lot of people have been using Bible verses to try to support socialism. And I've always taken the Bible to be, specifically a capitalist book because of verses like where Paul says, if a man doesn't work, he doesn't eat, and all those kinds of things. But would this passage here, specific, support more of a socialistic outlook because the Jews were forced to leave part of their field for the poor?
Yeah, I think that one of the interesting things about the Bible is that the only government that God mandated had very robust social programs. I mean, to the point where it would make a lot of libertarians and conservatives die on the inside if our government today basically said, hey, your private property, you need to let other people come and take your private property, and you have no say over the matter. It's your obligation to do so. Hey, if someone owes you something, every 7 years, we're gonna do mass debt cancellation, so that everyone, we have something similar in bankruptcy laws, in your credit reporting, you can only be reported for 7 years. So there are some statutes that we have in that sense. But what a lot of people may not realize is that, just because something isn't reported on your credit anymore, doesn't mean you don't owe it anymore. You still owe the company the money. There's no actual debt cancellation that happens. And when you actually start kind of thinking about how this would play out, they had set Sabbath years. So what happens if I get myself in debt to you, and you know that the Sabbath is only a year away? Now, are you going to have the hard heart that the Bible talks about, the begrudging heart, where you're not going to want to lend to me because you're like, well, if he doesn't pay it back, I'm going to have to forgive it in a year no matter what happens. And so there is a certain amount of reciprocity that has to go with it, and trust system, that we just don't typically find in a market capitalist system. However, the Bible also gives the ethics and the morality that is almost assumed and needed for a market system to work, and for a socialistic system to not fail all the problems that socialism has, right? One of the problems with, have you ever seen the movie Cinderella Man, I think, the boxer?
No.
There's the scene where he goes to the welfare line, he goes and he gets his money, goes and gets a fight, wins, and he goes back to the welfare office and pays it back because it's not an entitlement. So there's this idea of he just needs a little help, but he's going to work it off, and he's going to give it back into the system. He's going to give it back into the government. I think that what we see in kind of biblical economy is not, it's not socialism, but it's not free market capitalism. It might actually be something a little bit closer to like the Scandinavian states, minus the entitlement programs, a little bit more on the social welfare, relying on kind of the good nature of others.
I always find it interesting whenever people get in those arguments about, the Bible, capitalism, socialism. I'm like, if you went back then and tried to explain, that, they look at you like, what? No, that's not how it is. You think there's maybe also something in there to, it's like, okay, the Bible isn't giving necessarily economics, here's how that needs to work. It's, you are my people, and as a nation, as a whole, here's how you need to be behaving.
Yep.
That it's not an economic thing. It has some, obviously these guys are building some good stuff to saying to take care of people and whatever, but it's, we shouldn't take it as mandate of an particular economic system.
If I may jump in on this for just a moment. If you look at the way that the legal system and property ownership and economy and everything are set up in Mosaic law, that system works extremely well if the land is producing. The entire system, like a machine, is driven by the productivity of the land.
Yeah.
And if you look at the moral law, the consequence of obedience is production of the land. So the Levitical law constructs an economic system that is built around productivity, and then prescribes a moral law that results in productivity, which drives the machine. That's the water that drives the water wheel of that economy. So it's a very holistic system that links the morality portion into the economic portion. And so you see that the whole machine breaks down when they disobey. But then it works extremely well when they repent and God sends prosperity back on them. The whole Old Testament revolves around that
Yeah.
system.
Well, and to add also, I mean, it's not communistic and socialistic in the sense the people still control the means of production.
Yeah.
But another thing driving the way the system works is also property wasn't transferable. It was mortgageable for a short period of time. And so when you actually look through the way that God divided up the land, he gave certain bits to this clan and this tribe and this clan and this tribe and this clan and this tribe. So what happens is if I got myself in trouble and I got myself indebted, I could mortgage my land and my debt would be canceled after 7 years. But after 49 years, effectively there's a reset button on the land. Everything goes back to the original clans and the tribe that have it. And so you don't actually have the ability that you have and this is a good thing in the system. What you don't have is the ability, like we have in a free market system, for people to kind of gather resources and things at the expense of others. So you, at least in the way it's supposed to function, right? I mean, in my talk, that's exactly, they weren't doing that. That's one of the main
Right,
reasons
right.
God said that they were being judged because of that. And so you have that. It's one of the reasons why you also get a bunch of these weird laws about marriage laws and where things can go to, because effectively the system was set up so that you couldn't lose land in your tribe via marriage either.
Yeah.
So you couldn't marry off into a Gentile such that now the Gentile had property rights without actually converting into Israel, because they didn't want to kind of piecemeal out the land via marriage.
Right, and I think
Yeah,
also it's important, like,
You're not a mentionable.
two things. Well, then you can find another MC. But like, two things is, one, it was an agrarian society. So you literally had to work or you didn't get to eat. Like, we didn't have a person who answered telephones all day. We didn't have a person who sat at a computer to type out letters, or we didn't have, oh, I want to design this really cool video. Like, there was an agrarian society to where they had to raise an animal, raise crops in order to eat, and then they were trading that amongst themselves. And like you were saying about the marriage stuff, there was a case law. Moses had to set a case law for the father. He only had daughters, like Mark. So the Lamberts came, the Lambert daughters came to Moses and were like, hey, if we marry a Wilcox, then the Wilcox clan gets our land and our father's land goes away. What do we do? And so Moses had to set a precedent for that so that that situation could be handled. And another thing was, it's a theocracy. Like, this was the only theocracy established by God. Like, America's not a theocracy.
Right.
Surprise! Sorry to shock everyone, but America was probably.
This is America. This is God's country.
This is. Well, I completely
MAGA
agree.
country now, more
I
than
would
that's
completely agree that this is God's country and that God created it and He owns it. However, and so I think that's a part of the religious laws and the ceremonial laws that were there. You were set apart to be an example. They were to be an example of Christ to the nation, of like, this is what a holy person looks like. Obviously they failed because they were an imperfect example. Christ was the true Israel. So that's a part of it.
Okay, we ready for the next question?
Hey, Robert, Sentinel Apologetics. You wanted a shout out.
Okay, cool. All right, so the next one was again prompted by Tyler's talk, and it is this. We all agree that God allowed certain laws in the Old Testament because of the imperfect nature of the people. The obvious example being the divorce law. God allowed that divorce, not because divorce is a good thing, but rather because of the hardness of the heart. It was the optimal situation to allow the functioning of the people at that time. Could a argument be made for a Christian allowance of gay marriage based on the same principle?
No. I'm gonna say no,
Okay.
because, well, we don't have the ability to speak for God authoritatively like that.
Sure.
Um, but I think there's a principle there, excuse me, in how, we see, God as being, you get the old cliche, Old Testament, angry, wrathful God, New Testament, all about love and peace. It's like, well, that right there is an example of grace, of him saying, hey, look, I'm gonna meet you where you are,
Mhm.
and we're gonna work through this. And, but that can go back to, like you were saying, you mentioned in the panel, and then again in one of the questions about, we can still say that's wrong and you shouldn't do it, but I'm gonna come to you where you are and love you in that situation. And I think that establishes that principle, because that's how God's acting. Okay, guys, you shouldn't be getting divorced. I'm gonna let it happen if you do it like this, but come on, it's God kind of, meeting them where they are to work with them through things. And I think that principle is there, that we should act like that, but again, we can't just declaratively say, oh yeah, gay marriage is okay, God let them have divorce, and gay marriage is okay too. We don't have the authority to speak that. So.
All right. Anybody else want to talk on that?
I did my recent episode was all on this, so Free Thinker podcast, it's all there.
Well, yes, but your episode didn't address the, similarities or possible
Yeah.
connections between God allowing certain laws.
Yeah,
Not because they were optimal, but because they were
yeah,
efficient.
I mostly agree with Mark. I think, while I have big reservations about the church as an institution getting involved in politics in that way, in the way where we are pushing for specific legislation and kind of the secular pluralistic environment. I do agree that we shouldn't say, because God allowed for marriage legally, therefore we should vote to allow, you're allowed divorce legally, therefore we should vote to allow gay marriage legally. I don't think that those are analogous claims, even though I don't think we should necessarily also raise all of our money and capital to try to outlaw either. I'm not sure either one of those is the right approach.
Okay, now on to the children's questions. I think we can all answer easily who made God, so we'll skip to the next one. Here's the children's question. Again, this came from an actual child.
Did you send this book to Richard Dawkins?
I did not.
Oh, okay.
An actual child asked this question, so this is off the lip, out of the mouths of babes, so to speak. How could God make me if I grew in mommy's tummy?
Well, I guess I could take first crack at that one.
Sure, seems appropriate.
Yeah, well, I mean, yeah, and obviously this was a kid asking this question. I mean, if
Well, answer it as if it's an adult question, because I think this is a legitimate question.
well, no, yeah, no. So, because I mean, it would be, because I'm not trying not to make light of the questions, but I'm
Mhm.
asking, because God is all powerful, and so simply being in your mom's tummy doesn't necessarily mean that it would be too difficult for God to create. It's in fact it's the God ordained way that human beings would procreate, and so yeah, he can create. He can create a little baby in the mom's tummy, just like he can create a little worm, in the ground of the earth. So yeah, it's just nothing is too difficult for God. Essentially, anything that can logically be done, God can do because of his omnipotence.
Okay, so I think that one could make the case that the Bible says, in my mother's womb, you knit me together, and there's several passages like that where it talks about God being the impetus behind our creation within the mother's womb. But it's dangerous to, use the God did it explanation to the kid when, eventually the kid is going to come to learn that there's a sperm that fertilizes the egg and DNA is involved, and then they grow into a a zygote, which grows into and so there's an entire mechanical process behind the birth of this child.
Okay, because
And this could be-
the question was specifically about how God can do it, so I thought maybe she was asking about
No, the
God's
question,
power.
the question
Yeah.
is talking about a apparent contradiction, because one explanation the child will give you, well, God made you, you're a special creation of God, et cetera, et cetera. And then, they'll see that their mommy gets pregnant with their little brother or something like that. And that the little brother grows inside of mommy's tummy and comes out and then, scratch their head and say, but I thought God made me. And that's,
Okay, I
that's
see.
the question. There
Okay, I
seems to be a
see.
contradiction. Either God made me or I grew in mommy's tummy.
Okay, I
Those
see.
two.
Yeah, so in that case, just real quick, yeah, so then yeah, I guess maybe I'm just not thinking like a kid, I don't know.
Yeah.
But yeah, so my answer would be similar to that, God has established a way for procreation to happen. Now, I don't know how young these kids are, so I don't know,
Well, the
how-
kid that asked
how
this question
specific I should-
was 5.
Oh, yeah, so I might not talk specifically about sperm and ovum, but I would say something along the lines of, God created a way for a mom and dad who love each other to be able to make a baby, and this was all God's way of creating. So even though God doesn't, reach down and like touch the ground and there's someone appears, it's still God still made us because he basically created the way for us to make new babies in the mom's tummy.
All right, so as someone with small children, let the expert answer the question.
Yeah, okay, yeah, I also have no kids,
Right,
so.
so
yeah.
Mark?
It's the idea of, I guess you like to explain to the child, first causation, no. You said,
Man cause cause.
if you want to explain to a child,
Mhm.
and I guess one way they could do it, because, we're talking about, okay, there's natural processes that are gonna happen, that you could maybe, of course, this all goes, of course, I do this, like dominoes, line up the dominoes on the table. Okay, now hit that domino, all right, okay, who knocked down this one? Right?
Yep.
You did. Right, because the process followed through. And so it's like, okay, so what made this domino fall? The one before it, or did you? Now that can get into determining which you might be perfectly comfortable with.
I'd say you sound like a Calvinist.
There's hope for him yet.
Some
I'm
days
running off.
some days I choose to be a Calvinist, other days I'm predestined to be an Arminian. But, one thing, and this might, stepping away from the child conversation and just the larger, depending on, I guess whether one would hold the creationist view or the Traducian view,
Yeah, I'm a
it's
creationist.
gonna
when it
have
comes to-
some big implications on how one answers this.
Yeah.
And so,
We have a comment on this from Sentinel Apologetics. Passages like Jeremiah 31 and Jeremiah 33 speak about God upholding the uniformitarian laws of nature. Thus, pregnancy is an upheld process that is both natural and divine.
All right.
Works for me.
well said.
Thanks,
Not
Robert.
bad.
Anybody else want
Yeah,
to?
I like your.
Robert is an apologist from down under.
Oh, cool.
Down under what?
He's anti-Lucidum?
Does that
He's
mean
to the bottom of the ground.
Robert, are you
under the ground we
Are you
Okay.
an antipode? Are you the ones that the doctor was talking about?
Yeah, yeah. but no,
Augustine said there was no hope for you. I'm sorry.
Yeah, but no, I like your analogy of the dominoes though. I think that's a good way to illustrate.
Now, can I throw something out?
Yeah.
Too bad. Because it's on this topic, or it's related to this topic.
It's not one of us, is it?
No. A lady I was talking to, basically, because of, this kind of thing, God made you in your mommy's tummy. God knit you together in the womb, or a creationist view of that. And in her case, she was sexually abused by her father. So she says, okay, so God made me, put me there on purpose.
Mhm.
So I could be abused by my dad. And it's like, okay, where do you go with that? Because, let me try to drop that bomb, but.
If only we had a pastor here to answer that
I know,
question.
right? That'd be great.
Or a ruling elder.
No, that's a pastor.
Well,
Well, now,
I can, when you're finished, I can read the answer that the book gives, but,
well, and like I was saying, creation
No,
or
to
tradu-
show
I lean towards Traducian. So it's, well, God didn't specifically say, okay, I'm gonna make, little Susie in this family, knowing that this dad and this mom are horrible people and are gonna mistreat them this way. Here, let me put little Susie in that family. That, little Susie came along because mom and dad were in the backseat of a car after a concert.
Mm.
Can I push back a little bit?
Yeah.
Okay, because now, okay, well, I don't know if we maybe want to have the creation versus tradition conversation or not, but
Which I'm not
I-
firm, I just
no.
lean that way.
Okay,
so
now-
It makes a little sense to me.
yeah. So, okay, so I'm thinking of the passage in one of the New Testament books where I think it was one of Paul's books, if not his letter, it might have been Romans. But he talks about that whole passage about the potter and the clay, like who is the clay to ask, why did you make me like this? So I'm thinking, because my leanings are toward creation more have to do with my philosophical views than my scripture views, even though I think scripture supports a creation viewpoint. But my thought is, considering that passage, you know, I'm thinking, God may, I'm trying, okay, so I'll just say, if considering that passage that that the clay doesn't have any right to ask of the potter, why did you make me like this? My thought is, if creationism is true, then yeah, God creates each individual soul when the body is fertilized, or is conceived, and so obviously God being a good God wouldn't just place someone in there willy-nilly, but there's probably a greater purpose that it serves. And so my thought is, considering that passage, I don't think that this idea that God places certain people in abusive situations is necessarily a mark against creationism because of passages like that.
My and one thing that I've been kind of harping on lately in podcasts I've done, or whatever, is people tend to take these ideas, any idea, they pick a doctrine someone has a problem with, and they just pull that out and here, I'm gonna have a problem with this doctrine, rather than, okay, here's the whole framework of Christian belief and how it all weaves together. I used a couple weeks ago, used the idea of a mosaic. If you're just looking right up on a mosaic, it's just chaos, and there's nothing to it, it's ugly and chaotic. You have to step back and see the whole thing, and you see the beautiful picture.